So I moved from 11 Mile in Royal Oak to Seattle in '88. Um, went to one of the most gang-infested high schools, I think, at that time on the West Coast. Being that, like, we obviously have Cali and LA, but for some reason, a lot of the people gravitated north, and we had like just like crazy gangs at our high school. I'd never seen that because in Detroit, just like wasn't really gangs back then. It was just like people out for them, and like regardless of what you think my introduction to it was. So I moved out to Seattle and um, just kind of got influenced by a different kind of, just a whole different scene. Um, where my Detroit Tiger hat meant that, like, I was claiming I was a disciple. So, there was a little bit of an adjustment for everybody. But regardless, I moved back to Detroit in '92 once I graduated. And I was dating somebody, a girl that was going to Washington State at the time. And I was working. So when I moved back here, I started working at Mr. Allen's Shoes in Dearborn. And I had worked at a Foot Locker most of my senior year in high school. So I started working at Mr. Allen's, and I was working in, like, as people would have known, the 2 for $20 back then. So I was like kind of just dressed like some, like Jabot colored khakis or something, and like some, Timberlands or something. But there was also another side that sold very high-end men's dress shoes. So, I was just introduced to a whole different kind of thing back from being from Seattle, kind of like coming back to Detroit in '92. So, when I was working at Mr. Allen's, like, I don't know, I definitely felt stupidly safe in both, like, in Seattle, obviously, I was golden. I didn't live in the Central District of Seattle. I got bused. So I got basically like a 50-minute bus ride to go to the Central District because I didn't live like in that area. So, I was a product of that. But I mean, that's kind of what I would probably say that busing in Seattle at that time made me who I am, for better or for worse. So, once my senior year hit, I started like just kind of getting into cannabis, but not really, like, not knowing really what it was financially in the future for me or anything. And so when I moved back to Detroit, I had already kind of had a little bit of a like flavor and a touch in the green, like selling cannabis. So, but just barely. I'll get into that later. But it was like not real official, but it was just the introduction. So when I moved to Detroit, Mr. Allen's used to have these off-site sales. So, like, all the Mr. Allen's or whoever wanted to go would go down to like Cobo or Joe Louis Arena, and there would just be like, geez, it was kind of like, I would say, the mobile swap meet at that time. So it's funny because when I moved to Detroit in '92, I was already wearing like Ben Davis shirts and like a hat with a weed, or that kind of gear. So '92 comes along, I'm in Detroit, and all of a sudden I see G-Thing come on, and like they're all wearing the weed hats with the Ben Davis and all that, and I was in Detroit wearing that stuff. So it was, I was like, uh-oh, here it comes, and then the Chronic dropped, and like I remember like just everybody around Detroit loving that shit. Now, my boy Curtis, I'm not gonna say his last name here, but he grew up in Detroit. Then he went to Grambling. He came back. He's nothing but Detroit to the max. So he worked at Mr. Allen's with me, but believe it or not, I was the worst influence on him than he was on me. So he didn't know anything other than just like going out in Detroit. So like, we'd go to places like the Dancery, and that place would get like lit up. And he could tell that like I had been around it. I mean, I wasn't shocked. I didn't act crazy when the shootings were going on. So we just continued to kick it, and a lot of that kicking it back then was going to the Veterans Foreign Wars Hall, and it was always like bring your own stuff, and then like we provide our own security. It was kind of like the raves of Detroit, whatever. But you get there and it would be like hundreds of people, and I'd be the only white person in there with Kurt, who it's like I just didn't know any better, and I was just felt safe no matter where I went. So it's just kind of how I like carried myself, oblivious to sometimes a lot of the danger that I was putting myself and Curtis in. But when I look back to that time, I definitely know I used many of my 9 lives. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction. So anyway, they would have these off-site sales. So like when I went to my first off-site sale, they would sometimes like just hire some people for the weekend. And so that's where I met my homeboy, who at the time didn't know anybody that I knew or whatever, but he was straight Jamaican. His dad was a straight Rastafarian, and they lived like 7 Mile. And so I mean, that was like my boy Kurt, but he just sometimes wasn't really into the shit like I was. He wasn't. So I immediately got into going to their house, feeling untouchable because I was fucking with some Jamaicans, and feeling really crazy because I was like not just cool with my homeboy, but his dad was mad cool with me. So they used to just like, whatever you want, man, whatever weed you need, you can tape, slang, whatever. So that was my first introduction, and like I was getting, and I didn't ask for too much, so it was never really an issue. I just paid all my bills back and all that. But like, I would just take weed that I bought to go back down to Royal Oak to where some of my friends grew up with, and double my money. So that's kind of how I first got introduced. And then so once I left in like 93 and a half or whatever, and I went back to Seattle, like I had already like, I was already like a little bit in the weed game, which wasn't shit compared to motherfuckers that was selling cocaine and rock, which a lot of my friends were back in Seattle, but I wasn't trying to get into any of that. So I would just be around the weed, and to me, it just always was like, people didn't sweat the weed guy, because like back then it was like also heavy into coke and all of that nobody worried about the dude just slinging weed. And so that's kind of how I just got in. Like I wasn't fucking with the big other drugs. I only fucked with weed. And being in Seattle, you kind of have that hippie vibe out there. I never really thought, like, it's crazy that I almost lived like it was legal forever. I don't think I ever acted like it wasn't legal to me. Oblivious of my dangers.